Suspiria. There's only one Dario Argento, he likes to use the colours of the rainbow. The story's a witchcraft-fueled crescendo, I've not been this confused since I watched Memento. He co-wrote the film with Nicolardi, they must have been pissed on rum and Bacardi. Watching this film's like taking acid, at least you won't be intellectually flaccid. Suspiria. In seriousness though, this is a very good film. It's about a young American woman called Susie Banyan who travels to Germany to enrol in some kind of specialist dance school, but murders start to happen pretty much as soon as she turns up. So she starts to realise that a coven of witches might be in charge of this particular dance school. So this is a kind of supernatural giallo film, although to be honest, if Argento's name wasn't on it, I'm not sure I would consider it to be any kind of giallo film. I'd probably just think of it as a horror film with witches. But I think it was a good thing that he did something different at this stage of his career. I think he had taken that amateur detective style giallo about as far as he could with Deep Red. I know he went back to it eventually, but not before a considerable number of years had passed. So he co-wrote this film with Dario Nicolardi. Now, I didn't know when I was watching Deep Red just the other week that Dario Nicolardi and Dario Argento were actually real-life partners throughout the 70s and for much of the 80s. Nicolardi played the lead female role in Deep Red, if you're confused. Apparently they had a big dispute over who wrote Suspiria. I'm not going to get into that. What could I possibly add? I was a bit confused when I was watching this film the other night, though, because there's an early scene where the first victim of the film runs into a weird-looking hotel, and I thought the hotel owner was actually Daria Nicolardi. I thought, oh, she must have a small role in this. That's really cool. But then when I was watching the audio commentary, the two guys doing it seemed to think that Daria Nicolardi was actually playing an extra at the airport in the very first scene. And when we got to the stage of the film where we were at the hotel, they made no mention of this woman there being Daria Nicolardi. So I thought that's really odd. So I checked the cast list on Wiki, and no, apparently Dario Nicolardi is not in this film at all in any proper way. So that woman who plays that part very early on in the hotel must be an absolute spit of her if it's not her. Apparently she was meant to play one of the biggest roles in the film. She was meant to be Susie's main friend at the academy, but she had to pull out a few weeks before production due to an injury or something. If that's true, I think it was probably a happy accident because, I mean, I like Daria Nicolardi as an actress. She was amazing in Deep Red, but she looked about 30 in that film. So by the time they got to Suspiria, surely she would have been too old to play one of Susie Banyan's peers. Anyway, Suspiria was my first ever Dario Argento film. I think that's probably the same for a lot of people who get into his films these days. Suspiria is his most famous movie, so it is going to be the entry point into the Argento catalogue for a lot of people. I actually bought this on Blu-ray 2 or 3 years ago without even having seen the movie, which is sort of unusual for me, but I think I was galvanised into doing so because it has such a great reputation. I mean, this is regarded as one of the all-time classic horror films. It does have its detractors. I have heard one or two people over the years say, oh, it's overrated and that they don't get it. But if you think about it, a lot of the really famous horror films, they all have detractors. I mean, films like The Exorcist, The Shining, Scream, you'll always find people who think that those films aren't as great as a lot of people perceive them to be. The only universally loved horror film that I can think of is Halloween. I've never heard anybody say that that film is anything less than good at the very least. The story for Suspiria is quite basic when you think about it. I'm going into spoilers now, by the way, if that affects you. But when you boil it down, this is quite a simple tale. I mean, Susie spends a lot of the runtime just pottering around the academy, occasionally getting suspicious, and at the end she goes down into the basement, kills the head witch, boom, we're done. You know, it's not the most complex of stories, but it's the style of this film which makes it so amazing and why it's so rewatchable, at least if you're into it. The production design on this film is just absolutely crazy. I've not seen anything like it in any other movie. Right from the start, when the first victim runs into that hotel and you see these staircases that just veer off from each other, I've never seen staircases like that, either in my normal life or in a film. I'd be curious to know whether that was actually a real building or whether they were using some kind of mirror effect. But then you've got the patterns on the walls and the weird colours. It sort of reminds me of the film Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There's a scene where the parents and the kids get to go into the factory for the first time, but all the rooms and corridors seem distorted somehow, and there were twirly bits on the walls, and everything's off kilter. I'm not talking about the Johnny Depp one, by the way. I'm talking about the real Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There were indications in some of Argento's earlier works that he liked having really garish backgrounds and weird wallpapers, but he really, really goes to town on it here. I mean, it's all the way through the movie, and nobody seems to notice it. You know, this just seems to be a normal thing in this part of the world, in Germany, though Susie doesn't seem to notice it either. This American girl, I get the impression she's quite well off, though, so maybe she lives in a place as garish as this dance academy. There's also this weird thing where coloured lights seem to shine onto characters' faces. Like sometimes characters will just be stood there giving out their dialogue and they'll be bathed in like red lights or green lights. It's as if they had coloured like flashlights just off screen shining into the scene somehow. I don't know how they would have done that, but again, it happens quite often. There's an early moment where Susie is in a taxi cab and her face is just bathed in red, and I'm kind of thinking, how is that possible? Where's that light coming from? And ultimately, I don't think it's meant to be coming from anywhere. It's just meant to be part of the style of the movie. It's almost as if Suspiria is saying, it doesn't matter if scenes look realistic or feel realistic, as long as you're enthralled and captivated and entertained. The soundtrack plays its part in all this as well. This is one of the great soundtracks. The same group of people who did Deep Red are back to do this as well. Goblin. I think the main theme from Deep Red is better than the main theme from Suspiria, even though the one from Suspiria is obviously a lot more famous. There's just more to that main theme from Deep Red. I can almost listen to it as its own track, its own song. The beat from the Suspiria main theme is a lot more simple, but I think the overall soundtrack of Suspiria is better than Deep Red. I mean, this is an incredible piece of work. It's genuinely scary music, and it actually interacts with the characters in the movie in a weird way, or at least that's my interpretation. So, for example, there's an early scene where the first victim, whose name I can't remember, she's running through a forest, and eventually she gets to this hotel, and the music that plays to this, it doesn't feel like the music that you would normally put over the top of somebody running away from a dance academy. It feels like it's been lifted from a cannibal film. I feel like it's for somebody running away from a village because she's scared she's going to be eaten. But its effect is really chilling. Somehow it works this. I mean, it's really, really good. And in fact, for the rest of the movie, whenever one of the characters is running away, I feel like their fear is not just because they're scared of the witches, but because they're also hearing the same music that we're hearing somehow. As if the witches are projecting this soundtrack through the airwaves, and somehow these characters can hear these chilling tunes, these chilling sounds. And I don't know, that's my interpretation anyway. Going back to Susie Bannion, a quick few words about the actress who plays her, Jessica Harper. Not someone who went on to have the same sort of fame as, say, Linda Blair from The Exorcist, but I think her performance in Suspiria is highly competent. It's very easy to get behind this character from an early stage. I would have liked to have seen more of Harper's stuff, but looking at her filmography, I don't think she went on to do an awful lot that I would personally be interested in. You could argue that her character Susie sleepwalks her way through this plot somewhat, and that it's her roommate who is driving the need to investigate the witch's coven. But I like the effect that this has on the finale, because when Susie finally does go down into the basement, she does sort of give off the impression of somebody who is just waking up to the idea that the witch theory is actually true. That might be my favourite part of the film, actually, when she's finally going down into the belly of the beast and the theme tune kicks in again. The whole finale between Susie and Helena is a lot of fun. It doesn't overstay its welcome. There's no cheesy speech from Helena. You know, she doesn't hold a wand to Susie and go, well, seeing as I'm going to kill you anyway, I might as well tell you how I've managed to survive down here for the last 100 years from people like you. So basically, there's no Harry Potter type ending. Helena as a character is kept a mystery right to the end. I really like that. There's only one other part of the movie she's in, which is a lot earlier on, when the students are all made to sleep in the dance hall because there's been an outbreak of leeches up in their bedrooms. And bizarrely, Helena Marcus, even though she's not in the best of health, she brings her bed up into the dining hall, plonks it down behind this partition right near the students, and just decides to sleep in the dance hall. Why? It's really weird, but also creepy at the same time because of the fact that she breathes in a funny way. Another really weird scene is when Susie's roommate dies. She climbs through a window and then drops into a room full of razor wire. Well, it's more like sticky wire because it doesn't seem to cut her, it just keeps her there and until her assailant can catch up to her. But I think to myself, why is that wire all over that room like that? It's not as if the window itself is set up as a trap, because this character had to move a lot of boxes around to be able to get through that window to fall into this stuff. So Suspiria has lots of little mysteries like this that are not quite explained, but for some reason in this movie that's fine. You know, in Halloween it wouldn't work. You know, if somebody was running through Smith's Grove, climbed through a window and landed in a room full of bizarre sticky wire, it wouldn't have the same effect. It would be horrible. It'd be like, why? But in this film, it's fine. Before I wrap up, I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got. Here it is. I've got a Blu-ray done by Cult Films. It's one of those that comes with a DVD and a Blu-ray. I'm not the biggest fan of when they do that. I'll certainly never touch the DVD disc. There's quite a few special features, not as many as there are on a lot of the other Argento films that I've reviewed in this series up to this point. Most importantly, though, there is a commentary track. Give me one commentary track and I'm usually happy when it comes to features. This particular one was done by Alan Jones and Kim Newman. Now, I think they might be the same two guys who did some of the earlier ones on like Bird of the Crystal Plumage and Cat o' Nine Tails. I'm not entirely sure. It sounded like it might have been those two, but those Blu-rays were done by completely different companies, so I don't know if that's a factor in this sort of thing. But it's a very good track. That's the most important thing to say. I really enjoyed listening to these two guys talking about Suspiria. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this movie today. One, two, three, four, five. It's a full house. 5 bloody axes out of 5 for Suspiria. I love this film. It's absolutely gorgeous. I could not think of a single negative to say about it, in all honesty. It's just wonderful. It's definitely become one of my favourite horror films. It's one of those that deserves its reputation, quite frankly. So there we have it. I'll be back soon with a review for the remake of Suspiria. I'm going to take a little detour before we move on to the next Argento film, Inferno. Okay, until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.